Hi, my name is Cullhed from the University Library of Uppsala, and this is a presentation originally held at the CERL Collection Security Summer School in Tartu in September 2019. And this talk about security in the stacks will track some different perspectives, covering shelf monitoring as a means for audit of books. There will also be information about the assessment of stacks made at Uppsala University Library in 2017 and 18. And finally, there will be some information about how to prepare for disaster recovery. The idea of monitoring stacks emerged from the long and cumbersome manual audits, which are ongoing more or less all the time. Could this be rationalized by simply taking photographs of shelves in certain stacks? Initial tests showed that it would be fairly easy to compare images of shelves by aligning the photos side by side and comparing the result. On this slide you see an upper part of the image and a lower part of the same shelf, and they are aligned to see if the books from the original photo coincide with the books on the new photo. And as you may see in the middle of this slide, there is a small brown book missing from the upper part of the image, and that is quite easy to see on a photograph presented in this way. And it was found that a simple GoPro camera would fulfill the requirements we had on being able to photograph in narrow spaces, being able to trigger the shutter wirelessly, and to maintain a reasonable focus automatically. Some sort of camera stand was also needed, and this was constructed with simple gear from a hardware shop, put together to be lightweight but still reach the highest shelves we have, which are approximately 4 meters. It was named the Shelfie stick. Here you see the camera fitted in its innermost position. It is lifted with a cord, and the stick can be folded to fit into stacks with a low ceiling. Here on the left part of this slide you see it in a folded state, and to the right at full length. And this setup allowed us to take photos up to 7 shelves above the floor, and from the photograph one can blow up the photos just enough to be able to see individual spines. And the camera is triggered from below and monitored with an iPad or iPhone. As you can see from this film, it is quite fast. It takes approximately 7 seconds per shelf. To be able to link the photographs to a certain shelf, it's necessary to make a map of the stacks you're going to photograph. But as stacks are square and sit on certain places in square rooms, I find an Excel spreadsheet very apt for making a shelf map. The actual image files are stored in an ordinary file folder system. And now for an example. One day in February 2019, I passed this shelf and thought it looked a bit depleted. I knew that one book had been removed, but still, could there be something wrong there? After looking up the stored image of this special shelf, I could see that the books were less orderly arranged on the shelf at that point. And what we usually do is to upload the new and old images side by side in different apps for comparing them. This app is called Twin Viewer, and you can align the spines in a convenient way. And indeed, it was obvious that one book was missing. As it was an old parchment binding, there was no title on it, but a number helped identify it. Eventually we found it because it was misplaced, but we could follow its tracks, and we could see that it wasn't on the shelf where it should be. Now we come to risk assessments of stack. All through my professional life, there has been discussions with architects and buildings professionals about the so-called archival standard for safeguarding archives. There is such a Swedish standard, and it's being constantly updated by the National Archives. Building professionals have always clearly stated that libraries are not applicable for this standard, probably because they know that there are costs associated with following the standard. The reasoning for this is based on the fact that books have been produced in multiple copies, and if one is lost, others could be found. However, with a growing awareness of provenance, bindings, etc., books fall in the same category as archival material. And experience has shown that in practice it's impossible to recreate an old book collection. So my advice is to follow the standard also for book collections. The Swedish archives have a long tradition of safeguarding collections ever since the fire in the royal castle in 1697. This shows the old castle before the fire, and the castle contained both the Royal Library and the National Archives. And this is a contemporary image of the fire on May 7, 1697, where you can see the castle engulfed in flames. The 19th century old National Archives building, it's not used as an archive today, but this archive was fitted with a slide for the books in the event of a fire, a fact that sort of remembers that the saved books from the old castle were the ones thrown out of the windows. So they prepared for evacuating books with a slide like this. And the standard is all about lowering the risks and minimizing consequences. You probably all are familiar with this model for moving risks from being acute to being both lower and less disastrous. By lowering the consequences and by minimizing the probability that something might happen, you lower your overall risks. Another way of visualizing this is the risk triangle, where on the left triangle here, the broad base symbolizes the many small accidents that happen all the time. These correspond to the relatively small top of the upside down triangle. The corresponding damages are numerous but small, but if several unfortunate circumstances coincide, disasters can happen. If one analyzes disasters, there are often 4 or more factors that have coincided and brought about huge damages. One should always try to remove factors from the left side. One way of doing this is to make assessments of stacks. This shows the idea of evaluating stacks. It is based on a 20 units scale from 10 to -10. And assessments of stacks is juxtaposed to the assessment of collections, where the ones we can weed and get rid of, that is, books we can get rid of, they are valued -10. Normal collections should be 0, whereas the special collections are valued 10, and they are in the green area on this slide. This is the collection's valuation. There are a number of questions asked, such as, does the collection contain unique material? The values are weighted so that one answer alone can give enough points to produce a value 10 in the end. Take, for example, the first question on unique material. This alone gives a value of 93, which is always rounded off to the maximum value of 10.9, classifying this collection as a special collection, noted in the collection evaluation column. But of course, if the unique material is removed, things may turn out differently. So if you only have a few unique books, you should probably remove them from this stack. The same principle is used for the stacks. The questions come from the archival standard, and typical questions are 5 compartments 400 square meters or less? Is there a fire alarm with smoke detectors? These factors are more heavily weighted than others. The positive values are subtracted from the negative values, and the final figure is rounded off and put into the stack evaluation column. And then in the final evaluation, you see the different values inserted. Here the stack values do not correspond well to the collection values, with a difference of 14, which is way too much. And how far may values deviate? Well, of course we can tolerate some sort of deviation between the collection value and the stacks value. 7 steps, as in the lower part of the slide, is too much. I would say 3 steps or less for special collections, and a little more for ordinary collections. If the distance is too far, the gap needs to be closed by rearranging the collections or improving the room where the books are. The good thing with the evaluation sheet is that you can easily choose which factors should be changed. Now we come to disasters. They are always lurking behind the corner, and we need to prepare ourselves for them. The Notre Dame disaster seemed improbable, but still it happened. Probably it was caused by 4 or more coinciding factors. This is after the city fire in the Swedish city of Sundsvall in 1889. After that, more houses were built in stone. And the following slides serve to remind us of the never-ending story of library disasters. This is the public library of Linköping after the fire in 1996, which destroyed the city library of Linköping completely. This is the Anna Amalia library in 2005, slightly a year after that fire. This is a water-damaged archive after a severe storm with elevated water levels. So what can we do? We can prepare, plan, adjust and mitigate. This is a slide from a training event in Switzerland from 2007, arranged by the Swiss organization Cullhed, with some figures about the speed for evacuating wet material. They found that they needed 3 minutes per shelf meter to evacuate books. And that's an interesting figure. If we take a closer look at these figures, we realize that disaster recovery is a lot about logistics, and we should plan accordingly. If we, for example, like in the example on the left side of this slide, would need to evacuate 800 shelf meters of books, this can be done in a week. But what about 10,000 shelf meters? Would our stairs, lifts, doors or window openings allow for that? Not in this example to the right in the slide. It would take 12.5 weeks. And as we know that mold will start to grow from 2 to 7 days after the water damage, this is not a good situation. Practical exercises are very fruitful, as seen on the following slides. Firstly, a test material was prepared by burning books of no value. And then the next station was the selection or triage, where the books were divided for different treatments. They arrived in the buffer zone, where they were put in blue boxes with different destinations. The books were documented as good as they could be documented, because in a disaster situation it's often impossible to document individual books. But still, as much documentation as possible is needed. These exercises are good, but I would also like to recommend tabletop exercises, because they are more affordable and can be very effective. And here we see some typical questions from such an exercise. They can be like this. At 1910, on the 20th of January, the security company phones the security manager and informs him on a fire in the stacks on level 9 in the library. What are you doing at the moment, and how do you proceed? When you arrive, you learn that the fire is put out with the aid of sprinklers, resulting in 3,000 liters of water seeping through the floors. Who do you contact directly? Where can the plastic for covering shelves be found? How will you proceed to evacuate the wet books? And so on. And this ends my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.